everyone, Pam Gregory. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the second half of July and in particular the very powerful total lunar eclipse that we have coming up in Aquarius on the 27th. But just before we get to that, I just want to remind you we've got some quite complex energy operating all month because we actually have, by the end of the month, certainly 5 planets retrograde. We have Mars, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, and on the 26th of the month, Mercury goes retrograde at 23 of Leo for the next 3 weeks. So retrograde planets encourage our energy to move inwards before the energy moves outwards, to be more introspective, to go back over, to think more, to redo, to reanalyze before we strike out. Because there's going to be a strong impulse to go the other way, for thinking, to be very impulsive, to be a little too quick to react. So that's why the energy is quite complex, because if we take the planet Mars, for instance, that is very strong at the moment. It's strong partly because it's retrograde, because that means it's much closer to the Earth than normal. In fact, by the total lunar eclipse, it's going to be at only 35 million miles away from the Earth, as opposed to its average 140 million miles from Earth. That's closer than it's been since 2003. So that proximity tends to amplify the symbolism of Mars. And I think we're all familiar with the symbolism of Mars, but it's about assertion, willpower, focus, attack on a project, aggression. Though if you think of Mars in terms of its energy, in myth it was god of war, it has that kind of focused attack or impulsivity connected to it, particularly when it's square to Uranus, which I'll come on to. The other reason Mars is very strong is that it's out of bounds, what is called out of bounds. So from the 7th of July to the 24th of September, it has gone beyond the normal 23 degrees of declination as defined by the Earth's orbit around the Sun. Because by the total lunar eclipse, Mars will have moved to 25 degrees south, beyond that normal 23 degrees. And when a planet is out of bounds, as Mars is at the moment, it is considered to be more out of control, or more extreme, or more maverick in how it manifests its symbolism. So 2 big reasons there that Mars is very strong. And thirdly, it is in this square to Uranus, which I talked about last time. They're both in the early degrees of Aquarius for Mars and Taurus for Uranus, and they will stay in that square all the way through to the 1st of October. And at a low level of expression, this is about angry impulsivity. It's about feeling edgy and restless and frustrated and irritable. And it's ever so easy to lash out if you feel you're being criticised or you're reacting too quickly to someone. So really try and be the witness, be the observer. Try and always be one step back from what is happening in any intense situation. We're going to feel a lot of intense energy through July, not only because of the strong Mars I've talked about and this more erratic quality, this square to Uranus, more eruptive energy, but also because of the eclipses too. So what we may find is that events are very fast moving. They can be in your own life or out in the big world, as it were. Very fast moving, but often zigzagging, twists and turns, changing direction because of all the retrogrades and because of this erratic quality of Uranus in square to Mars. So even though there might be prevailing chaos out there, try and see yourself at the hub of the wheel. Try and see yourself as keeping your peace, keeping your calm, staying at the hub of the wheel. Other events may be maybe the rubber hitting the road and a lot of speed happening on the outside of the wheel, but you are retaining your equanimity on the inside of the wheel. And I think that will guide you well. And how you do it is up to you, whether it's breath work or meditation or candle gazing or listening to music or all the things that I often recommend. Find a way that you can just drop into that default place of peace and calm. Because the eclipses will be intense, and this one in particular, the total lunar eclipse, is happening on the 27th of the month. It's happening at 4 degrees 44 minutes of Aquarius. It's happening at 1:20 p.m. Pacific and 9:20 p.m. UK time. This is possibly the most powerful lunar eclipse of the century because it has the greatest duration of 1 hour and 20 minutes. It's very long. And it's going to be visible from Africa, India, large parts of Asia, even over to Japan, Australia, more the west than the east, but also East and South America. It's going to be visible in those areas. So you should be able to experience it quite clearly from those areas. And often the areas that are where it's visible are more prominent in the news, but I think there are going to be other countries, which I'm going to mention a little bit later, which are going to pop into the news as a result of this eclipse. So we'll come back to that. But an eclipse is really like a great big full moon. So this is the peak of the moon cycle. So it's always about a culmination, things coming to fruition, feelings running high, things coming up to closure. So if you don't know where 4 degrees of Aquarius falls in your chart, you can download a free birth chart from my website. Please check out these tutorials because they will answer that what does it mean for me question, because I always get many people writing to me and saying, what does that mean for me, and are you just talking about the planets in their orbits, or are you talking about my natal chart? I'm talking about both. I'm talking about how you have to understand for your own birth chart how to match up what's happening in the heavens to where it's falling in your chart, because unless you do that, this is just a much more abstract update. But if you can pinpoint where it falls in your chart, that will give you a great deal of meaning as to how your life is starting to unfold if you watch those patterns. And people get very excited about that personal journey. So if you can get the tutorial videos, and then you'll be on your way. It can shine a light. Full moons can shine a light on secrets, and I think this total lunar eclipse is very much about secrets being revealed. Very much so. We could see some quite profound secrets coming up at this time. You may find that people from the past, from way back in your life, come into your life now, or behaviours you've had come up in order for them to be released. Because even if this isn't aspecting any of your planets, because Mars is in the sign of Aquarius, because the total lunar eclipse is in the sign of Aquarius, you may see changes in your friendships. And this is really down to an issue of frequency. If you are evolving, as is very possible with this Mars square Uranus, one of the very positive things that it does is help to upgrade us, help to shift our consciousness. And if that's happening, you'll just want to start to mix with people of a similar frequency to you, this new frequency you've achieved. And so people from the past, friendships you've had, won't have arguments, just they will naturally fall away because you've moved on to a different frequency. The world is all about frequency. That really governs everything, I think, but that's a much longer conversation. But for sure, it could change people's friendships, everyone's friendships to some degree, and social networks that you're involved in. So this is a very interesting eclipse because the Mars square Uranus I've talked about is integral, is locked in to this total lunar eclipse. At one end, we have the Sun in Leo at 4 degrees, tightly conjunct the North Node in Leo at 5 degrees. They are opposing Mars at 3 degrees of Aquarius, the Moon at 4 degrees of Aquarius, and the South Node at 5 degrees of Aquarius. And all of them are squaring Uranus at 2 of Taurus. So it's a T-square. So it's very tight tension T-square, particularly because it's in fixed signs. And when you get a lot of planets in fixed signs, so here we have the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, the nodes, Mars and Uranus with all this tension in the T-square aspect, it is very common to have earthquakes and volcanoes because the tension has to break somewhere, the tension has to go somewhere. But also because where we look at the south node, this is a south node eclipse. When we had the solar eclipse in Cancer, that was a north node eclipse. This is a south node eclipse. Eclipses can only happen at the north or south node, transiting north or south node. And this is really, whenever we have a south node eclipse, it's about releasing the past. South node is about our collective past. So it's about behaviours that no longer serve us. Now, because Mars is in that tight conjunction with this eclipse moon, that is collectively pursuing aggression, pursuing war, is now hollow. That is not the way collectively to benefit our evolution. What we need to be doing is looking to the north node end where the sun is shining, which is living from the heart. Leo is heart energy. Living from the heart and living with compassion. That's where we need to go for our evolution. And what will help us as well is we still have this beautiful trine between Jupiter and Neptune. That's about a connecting to oneness, connecting to source. It's quite mystical. And also we have Venus in Virgo opposing Neptune in Pisces. And that's about finding the divine in small, beautiful things, finding divine in the tiny. Stare at a flower and look at the construction of the whole petal system. Pick up a shell from a beach and look at that. Is that in the Fibonacci sequence that occurs very frequently in nature? Just look deeply into some natural objects. Find divinity, find divine intelligence in the tiny and the beautiful. And that's one way that we can shift our energy from the hubbub or the chaos of what's happening in the outer world to something which is a much better guide for us, that connection back to source. So it's a very good time to release habits that no longer serve you, particularly aggressive or assertive habits. Now, it's interesting to see some pushes and pulls in the Zeitgeist as well. I've mentioned in the past, and I've talked quite a lot about it in the newsletter, about my monthly newsletter, about how Mars in Capricorn is getting closer to Pluto in Capricorn too. They're going to become conjunct in January 2020. This whole lineup of Saturn and Pluto is, if you look back historically, it's all about law and order, increased law and order, increased autocracy by governments, increased social controls by governments. It's about walls, borders, boundaries, divisions, separation, and control by a top-down government. And it's interesting the way even Europe is changing its whole attitude to immigration. You know, them and us, rules, regulations, laws. This is all very much Saturn, Pluto in Capricorn. Vertical structure to society, strong governments in control and issuing laws that keep us in order. However, the surge against that is really what we're seeing now with Mars in Aquarius square Uranus. I mean, this is really an aspect of social revolution, of people protesting, people expressing their views strongly. And the higher aspect, I mentioned the lower aspect of Mars square Uranus earlier, of irritation, frustration, irritability. The higher aspect is Mars pouring energy into Aquarius, which is the sign of humanity. It's the sign of equality, it's the sign of mutual respect, it's the sign of the collective, it's the sign of the community. So as one set of aspects are prevailing in one direction, another set of aspects is prevailing in another. And that's a form of social revolution. And I think we're going to see that I think we're seeing it very clearly in several countries already, and I think that's going to expand. And it's going to be the young people, the millennials, people who have Uranus and or Neptune in Aquarius from their birth. They are going to be feeling that, and they see themselves as a collective. They see themselves as the us generation rather than the me generation of the baby boomers. So it's very exciting because we're going through this change in paradigms, if you like, and the new paradigm is going to be, I think, birthed from the young people particularly, seeing people as equal, not as different. And bring it on. I mean, that's just wonderful. What's quite interesting as well is to see where this total lunar eclipse, because it's so important, falls in certain countries' charts. It's very interesting. It still falls across the nodal axis of the US. And that to me, because that nodal axis in the US chart, the Sibley chart, 4th of July 1776, 10 past 5 in the afternoon, Philadelphia, is describing the country's ideal evolution. And so actions, decisions taken at this time, particularly for America, because it's on the nodal axis, will be, I think, pivotal really in the way that the world moves. That's why I think this is so incredibly important for the direction of the world. I really think it's a very big deal. It's interesting it falls in the 2nd and the 8th houses of that US chart, which suggests that there could be changes in the economy, and the 8th house is international trade. So, of course, this reflects the new tariffs coming in that the US has imposed on other countries. See the total lunar eclipse very much as endings and beginnings, personally, but also how it's operating in the world. The total lunar eclipse is conjunct the sun of the Australian chart, the sun in Australia, and also tightly square the sun for India. So we may see those countries, Australia and India, coming up in the news too. If you look at the eclipse a different way, if you run what's called astrocartography of the moment of the eclipse, and this is where if the planets were to leave shadows as they fall across the Earth, where would the shadows fall? Particularly if they are on an angle, because any birth chart, any chart of a country it's like crosshairs in a compass, has 4 corner points, if you like, and those angles of the chart are incredibly important because they tend to produce prominence for the country in terms of the symbolism that is falling on them at that time. I hope I've explained that clearly enough. Anyway, interesting that the eclipse moon and Mars and the South Node square to Uranus, of course. The moon and Mars and the South Node fall on the ascendant at London. It's rising, it's on the ascendant at London. And recently, in the last day or so, we've just had quite a kerfuffle and quite a crisis because 2 very prominent cabinet ministers involved in the Brexit process have resigned, and that's caused quite a flurry and some turmoil in the government. And of course, the ascendant of a country is how it's projected. So that was a shock and a surprise, Uranus, and hopefully we can regain some composure. But yes, it's already hit London. Moon, Mars and the South Node also are falling over Russia and Iran. That's at their mid-heaven point, which tends to be the head of the country or the government of the country. And very interestingly, if we look at another angle, if we look at the IC, which is the absolute base of a chart, that is falling over West Coast America, one of the areas that those planets are falling over. So, and if we ran a chart, say, for Los Angeles or San Francisco, we would find the Moon, Mars and the South Node at the base of the chart. Now, the base of the chart of a place, a country or a town, that is the Earth, as it were, the Earth in that area. Now, Moon, Mars, I think very much describes the fires that we've been seeing, terrible fires we've been seeing in California. So maybe some continuation of those awful fires, because Mars is fire, and we're dealing with the Earth. So, but it is quite an eruptive energy as well. So I just ask you to be very alert to that too. So we have a great deal happening at this eclipse. I do believe it's incredibly powerful. It's much more powerful than the solar eclipse that we had in Cancer just recently. And so really see how this is operating in your life. I always like to use astrology strategically to say, how can I use this to the best in my own life? What is the best I can be with this total lunar eclipse? Where is something coming to closure, coming to fruition in my life? And where can I use this as a springboard, because it's an ending and a beginning, to jump off and prepare something at a higher level, particularly because it's Aquarius, to do with mutual respect, equality, humanity, community, the collective, a coming together, an inclusion, not a separating of peoples. Feel that very strongly. But remember the image of being at the hub of the wheel. Peaceful, calm, loving, beaming out heart energy, North Node in Leo, and that will serve you well. To be the observer, to be the witness, that will serve you well. So have a wonderful total lunar eclipse in Aquarius. If you'd like more information about my books, my tutorial videos, my ever so long monthly newsletter, where I actually go into much more detail about the things I just touch on here. I look at historical cycles, I look at what's unfolding in the world right now, what we anticipated the month before and what's actually happening. So it's a great way to learn, and that costs £1 a month, $1 a month, and you can subscribe on any page on my website. So if you'd like to learn more that way, that's a great way to do it. So thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful total eclipse in Aquarius, and bye for now.